Welcome to the Working World. I'm Karen Mendez.
And I'm Jamie Lingham.
Jamie, we just met with Dr. Elora Voyles, the people scientist at TINYpulse, which is a Limeade company based in San Diego in the United States. Elora is an industrial organization psychologist and a people scientist at TINYpulse, with an emphasis on research and application. Now, Elora's skills and experience include teaching and training, survey design, and statistical analysis. But she also leans into performance management, recruitment, leadership, and employee appraisal. She's written some recent articles around a concept she has coined called the Zoom ceiling, and she's referring to that as the new glass ceiling, which has been an interview a topic she's been interviewed on quite a bit, and it unpacks the unexpected consequences for workers who opt to work remotely. Now, Jamie, I don't know about you, but it was a pretty fascinating conversation with some really good takeaways there for everybody watching.
Agree, Karen. I think that the hybrid working model was of most interest to me. Obviously, we are recalibrating how we're dealing with remote work. It's not just full remote work. It's not a dictated remote work, but it's it's a collaboration, I think, of how people are going to work in the future. And once, the pandemic's over and people go back to normal, it will be a different world. It will be a different look, the new normal, as we like to say. But yeah, I think that Elora, these type of people are going to be super valuable in setting policy and procedures for how business is going to operate in the future. And I just think she had so many great points and really putting down and having a central area that we can start to get this research is an important step forward for all companies.
Absolutely. I think one of the biggest takeaways for me was around, that she touched on purposeful work for organizations and being purposeful about where you work and when you work. And I found it fascinating that some organizations now are even looking at hiring, directors of remote working as a permanent position in their organization. So I think there's a lot of great takeaways for HR professionals and mobility professionals in this one, Jamie. So enjoy, guys. We'll hand over to,
Okay.
Hi, Elora. How are you? Welcome to the Working World. Lovely to have you.
Hi, thanks for having me. I'm doing great. How are you doing?
Good, thank you. Jamie, how are you?
Yeah, Karen, pretty good. It's interesting where we're at, I suppose, with this whole pandemic and some countries moving into an endemic, and there's still a lot of fallout in different ways. And so I think it's we're still on the Corona coaster, right? We're still living in interesting times, and I'm pretty excited about today's session.
I know. I want to cut through the niceties and jump straight to it, because selfishly I want to hear all about it. So Elora, with your permission, I'd love to start talking about the subject if we could. I might just jump in with the first question, if that's all right. I know we've talked about off camera, we've talked about this quite a bit, but for those viewing, I wanted to kind of dive into, the Great Resignation. I know that was probably a term that originated out of the US. Folks here in the rest of the world might be more familiar with hybrid working, but both those subjects are things that have come out of your research. And so I wondered what were some of the tangible examples that you're seeing from organizations on how they're tackling retention and helping their employees balance that, return to the office and working from home.
Yeah, it's tough because there are so many kind of new factors involved that organizations have not faced before. So as Jamie mentioned, we're in the pandemic, and there's a lot of uncertainty about exactly when it'll be safe for organizations to come back fully in person. I can tell you from my research that we have found that the majority are actually, if possible, they've been switching to hybrid more than remote work, which is a shift from the beginning of the pandemic. Another thing that I found through my research is that a lot of organizations are using remote work, increased flexibility, and kind of using like the benefits of their positive culture to bring in employees in order to counter the Great Resignation.
So just on that, we're talking about this hybrid model. I suppose my question would be, have you got examples of companies that are doing this really well? And I suppose on the other side of the coin, have you got some companies that aren't doing it well at all?
Yeah, in terms of companies, I don't know
I don't
if I
need
have.
names. Hey, we don't need names. I just need like examples, right? Company A
Yeah.
versus company
Maybe
B.
industries, hey?
Yeah, right.
That could be good too. Okay, well, I'll give you an example of a company that I became aware of actually outside of work that was doing it really poorly, to where I was kind of shocked. I won't even say what industry they are because this example will get a little specific, but and people might be like, oh, that's us.
Yeah.
This company basically kept kind of saying they were going to put off bringing in employees until it was like a mask mandate lifted in their state. And then they kept saying, okay, we're not going to return full time to the office until this mandate's lifted. And then the mandate wasn't lifted, but they still kind of broke their promise and went back on their word. And they brought employees back before they said they would, forcefully. And then I don't want to be too specific because it's so intense, but they brought in a group of performers to welcome the employees back. And many of the employees were very put off because they were concerned because that was just 20 more people in the cafeteria and they were worried about their safety.
Yeah.
And so they felt that it was a very tone deaf way of, one, going back on their promise, and then two, kind of a disregard for safety. And I think this emphasizes the need for organizations to talk to their employees, to listen to them and find out what their employees need.
And so what's the shining example? What's one that you've seen and you've gone, wow, this is what we need to use as the blueprint. This is what we sort of wheel out to everyone and suggest that this is the best way it's happening.
This answer may not be satisfactory. I'm not sure, but I've actually felt that we don't have a shining example of, wow, they're really nailing this. Yeah. But I want to go gentle on the companies because these are unprecedented times. There's a lot of uncertainty. And so it's hard to nail it. It's almost like gambling to really kind of develop a policy and be able to see into the future. For example, many companies decided they were going to go back, for example, last summer, and then they had to pull back again, particularly, in the United States and the UK because of Omicron, or Delta, and then Omicron again. Mm. So it's tough for organizations. I think for the ones that are nailing it, they are listening to their employees, and they're also very transparent about saying, this is our current policy, but it may change due to the circumstances of the pandemic.
Mm. I think obviously employees and the public in general are fatigued by how long the pandemic is going on. But I think also, to your point, with organisations having to pivot back and forth between, or toggle back and forth between open close, I think they're also very fatigued. And to your point, they I guess they just don't know what's next and what's the right thing to do. So it's interesting, but that not so great example is an interesting one as well. I guess the intentions were good, right?
I think they were. I think they, if I'm being honest, I think that policy and those ideas were developed by extroverts, who were like, oh yes, let's bring everybody back. Let's be one big happy family. Let's hug. And it's like many people, especially those who are worried about the pandemic or who are kind of introverted, were taken aback by this.
Yeah. It's an interesting example.
On that, I just think that you make a really good point. People sort of seem to, in my view, there's this cookie cutter, one size fits all type approach that's been done for company policies and procedures. And it really feels like that this is a broadening of that, where it's like, okay, there's going to be, your 15% who do not want to leave the house at all, and other ones are happy to venture out, but not too far. And, then there's the ones who are just like your extroverts, I'm going to run and I'm going to hug everyone and no mask and who cares? And, so I think that, isn't it really about understanding, as you said before, you do a questionnaire, you understand how your individuals, what they want, and then how to manage it from there, right? It seems a lot more, it sounds like it's got to be a more measured approach.
I think so, absolutely. It needs to be a measured and strategic approach, taking into account, what employees want and need, plus the business needs, as well as, of course, safety. And it's tough because employees want answers quickly. They want to know, when are we going back? What is happening? And so it's tough to do all those steps and meet that need for like the quickness.
Yeah. And keep your business going at the same time.
Yeah.
Just sticking on the thread of, we talked about the Great Resignation, hybrid working just then. Another term that's kind of bubbled up to the surface recently is the Zoom ceiling. Now, I love this one because obviously it has some understated references to the glass ceiling and all the rest of it. But I wondered whether you could talk us through this term, the Zoom ceiling, and what it potentially means for remote workers.
Absolutely. And I'm glad you're asking about this because it's a topic that, is affecting a lot of remote workers, but they may not be aware of it when they decide to work remotely. I coined the term Zoom ceiling, specifically, as you said, with the idea of the glass ceiling in mind. It's this invisible barrier that is stopping workers from being able to move higher in getting promotions and taking leadership positions. In particular, it does affect women, and it affects people who are minorities, and it also affects people who have disabilities. I'll explain why in a moment, but essentially it's people who are working remotely are at a disadvantage a lot of times. This can be because of their managers' biases, the way the organization is structured, but that is the Zoom ceiling, to where when it comes time for a promotion, they may be passed over because they're out of sight and out of mind.
Yeah, I mean, I was just thinking, it's funny how, like, we go on a search engine, we say, let's Google it. And now we're going like, okay, let's go to the Zoom ceiling, right? Even though there's Teams and there's other, sort of programs out there. But I think that it's, I mean, if people are going to have to be in this situation, what roles do managers play in making sure that there's no Zoom ceiling? Like what role does HR play and what role does managers play? And how do you work with your people? Because as you said, it's this sort of out of sight, out of mind. And it's I was going to say a brave new world. I don't know if it's brave, but it's different, right? It's a different new world. And so how do managers, because we're talking to our audience here, mobility professionals and HR recruitment and senior managers. And so what would you say to them? How do they make sure that people don't get, there's not one cohort that's stuck in under the Zoom ceiling?
Yeah, okay. So I think there are a lot of things that managers could do. And unfortunately, we've just switched quickly to remote work. The percentage of workers who are working remotely or hybrid has drastically increased since the beginning of the pandemic. But what's interesting is those workers haven't really been trained in working remotely, and managers haven't been trained on working and managing remotely, which it requires a different set of skills. For the managers, I would absolutely suggest that they look at their current policies, particularly for promotion and hiring, and make sure that those aren't centered around in-person interactions. So make sure you're not just making the decision based on, having pleasant conversations or what you happened to see when you walked by someone's, workstation or their desk. It needs to be completely equal. This is especially if you have a hybrid team. The Zoom ceiling looms closer when you have workers who are remote and those on the same team who are who are in person, because those who are in person are around, they're there to chat, they are with the boss. The other thing I would say is that managers should keep in mind that they may have this bias. Either, explicitly, they may know, like, hey, I think, there was a CEO who came out and said, I think remote work is terrible, and remote workers are lazy, and which is
the
very
big bank,
troubling.
right? We're not going to name the name, but I
wasn't going to.
The Forbes article, I got it. Just check it out yourself. But no, definitely, And I find that amazing that someone can say this is not a thing. Like it's like, it's unbelievable.
Yeah. Now, from what I understand, I think they've walked back those statements, but I wasn't going to name them, but they stated this, and I think it kind of shows a resistance to something that is going to be and will continue to be very widespread. We're going to work remotely and hybrid even after the pandemic, to where COVID is endemic. So yeah, managers should be aware of that bias. That's an explicit bias when they're like, hey, I think they're lazy. There could be implicit bias where managers aren't aware of thinking differently about remote workers, but they may kind of see their accomplishments as not as great, and they may not know why. Or they may, when that remote worker messes up, they may be extra hard on them without kind of understanding why they're being harder on them.
Yeah.
Can organizations maybe support their management or senior leadership with, I guess, training, if it exists, around addressing some of that unconscious bias, perhaps?
I think so. Now, I will say that like a lot of organizations the unconscious bias training has gotten a bad rap in some circles. But I think teaching awareness about working remotely and about the research, because I would tell managers, any manager who asked me, I've done the research myself, and also I've read other people's research. There's not a difference in remote workers' dedication. I found no differences in their commitment to their work. There's also research that the remote workers are actually working longer hours and are more productive. So a lot of the negative biases don't hold. And so a training could teach managers about that, and it could teach managers the skills so that they could, effectively manage a remote team.
I love the idea. Sorry, Karen.
No, go ahead, Jamie, you're fine.
I was just going to say, I just love the idea of the whole training, because you're right. I think that people haven't been trained in how to manage a remote workforce or to be a remote manager. And, our experience is, what we've found is that people working from home actually seem to be working longer hours, which isn't a great thing for us. We don't sit there and rejoice and go, great, we're getting extra hours out of people. I think that having that home environment and having it feel like there's not the disconnect before where you were at home or you're at work and you sort of, you had your different hat on at each place. Sort of obviously now that the two have come together, it seems to be, in our experience, that I feel like people are working longer hours, which, I think that you're right, like having this sort of training or recognizing how, that they do it. And how do you put the brakes on it? How do you make sure that people get the work-life balance? I suppose that's my my question. Like, how do you start to ensure that people are still, that companies aren't going too far and taking too much?
Yeah, you're raising an excellent point there. And I think that is a concern. One of my other recommendations for managers would be to set clear policies for remote workers. When are you working? What are your hours? What are the expectations for what you're working on? Yeah. What are the expectations for communication? I think those are all really important. And the other part is that protects the employee as well. I think with remote work, there can be some uncertainty. And if employees are feeling this uncertainty of like, how much is expected of me, they may overwork, which can lead to them constantly being connected to like email for work and messages from like chats for work. And that can be really exhausting. So I would definitely say that organizations should have policies in place in terms of protecting workers for their time off as well.
Because of course, the natural progression there is it can lead to burnout, which then can lead to turnover, which then, and you kind of circle back to that original question around kind of the Great Resignation, right? Like you have this constant cycle going on. I think though that having policies is one thing, but employees knowing where to find them and organizations making them visible and communicating them, I think that's the other half of the equation as well. Have you seen, and again, industries, not names, but have you seen some examples of industry leaders out there or organizations that are doing that really well and being quite active in their PR or their communication to their employee base around what their expectations are?
Yeah, I've seen guides in the industry. I haven't heard firsthand from organizations about, what their policies are or how they're doing it. I will say that from the company that I work with, so I'm with TINYpulse, which is a Limeade company. Limeade actually hired a director of remote work to help with these policies. So a dedicated position to act as a resource to workers and managers who are working remotely. And I'm excited to see what we'll accomplish with remote work. And, you know, to be honest, with a lot of organizations, I think it's very much they're making it up as they go along and testing what works and what doesn't. So I think that remote work, you know, my idea behind remote work and talking about the Zoom ceiling was like, hey, there's this caution here, but I never want to say don't work remotely. I think remote work can be fantastic. I think it can really bring flexibility and, you know, really allow workers to live the life that they want to while getting their work done. But there's very much a caution of we need to do this well. At the beginning of the pandemic, we were thrown into it, but now we need to really be systematic.
I just love you got a director of remote work. I just I'm not sure how you got on a previous experience, or did this person come in and they say I've been a director of remote work for 5 years, or they sort of just evolved into that role and put their hand up for it?
Great question.
That is a great question. I actually had a meeting with him last week. He said that he worked as a director of remote work for a large, like a package delivery company. He from 2012, I think, to 2017. So he had a ton of experience, and really, I feel like happy for him because he was well positioned going into the pandemic, you know, already having this awesome experience. And then he just got hired on with my company, Limeade, sometime within the last, I think, 6 months.
Wow.
Amazing. Yeah.
It might be a new role that a lot of companies will hire.
Yeah, I was going to say it's ahead of the trend. It's obviously acknowledging that there's a sustained need there, right, for an investment into a resource. So, which I think, to your point, organizations are still kind of, what I took from your point, I should say rather, is they're still reconciling that, and they're still coming to grips with the fact that, you know, not suggesting everyone needs to go out and hire a director of remote working, but that they need that kind of dedicated resource. And I found it interesting you mentioned that resource actually is available to employees to approach. So not only, not only is it a senior leadership role that has input and influence into the leadership level, but it's also there as a resource for employees to contact, which, you know, it makes complete sense to do that. But I think, you know, if you don't get that balance right, you could end up with a very uneven model around your remote working or your hybrid.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I would say for the remote work position, I think that he's going to be systematic and he's going to be able to develop those kind of strategies for making remote work better. Yeah, it'll be interesting.
Sorry,
Jamie.
No, you go. I took over last time. You go for it.
Thank you, sir. No, I was just going to say I understand that there was a Stanford study done recently where, you know, kind of coming back to that Zoom ceiling subject around the promotion rates for remote workers. I think they were roughly half of that of individuals that were in the office, which was pretty shocking. I guess, you know, we talked about, you know, what remote workers can kind of do around, you know, and being, I guess, themselves conscious around being in the office or not, and what managers can do around their conscious or unconscious biases. But, you know, is there some practical things that remote workers can do to ensure that they can stay front and center their own career progression? You know, assuming they want to do that and they want to keep, you know, moving up the ranks, is there anything that they can do to kind of mitigate that?
Yes, and I would say that the first overarching theme of everything I'm about to say is intentionality. I think remote workers can't really rely on kind of random happenstance, bumping into so-and-so from this department and coming up with an awesome collaboration. I think workers who are remote need to now be more systematic and intentional when they're thinking about, you know, what kind of development do I need for my career? What skills do I need? And who do I need to talk to? And then what should I highlight to my manager to make sure they're aware of everything that I'm accomplishing? So those examples kind of build in everything I'm about to say, the very practical recommendations. So if you're a remote worker and you're wanting to get promoted, I would say speak with your manager and make sure that you understand their expectations, and also make sure to highlight your achievements with them. 2, find out what kind of training you need to get to the next level in terms of promotion. and seek out that training. Now, you do that regularly with in-person work, but I think you have to work a little bit harder and be more intentional with remote work. And then build those bridges, find out who you need to talk to in order to get the connections and collaborations that you need.
So one thing that we touched on earlier is just about how getting the model right has to be, you know, the way forward. So as far as managers go, you know, like do the survey, let's be alive to the needs of the employees and what they want in their specific case. Now, what would you say to managers or the, you know, people in people in culture or human resources or mobility or whatever? What would you say to them if they've got a manager who doesn't believe in this process and this system? How would they actually sort of sell it into them? Where would they go for the resources? How would they convince someone that, you know, we really have to take the time? Because I can imagine there's managers out there who go, this is rubbish, you know, let's just, well, we say rubbish, you know, it's trash or whatever this is. But, you know, it's, you know, and we'll schedule people to come in on certain days. Like I've heard people saying, okay, well, Elora, you're in on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and Karen, you're in on Tuesday, Thursday, and that's your sort of deal. It might not suit you though. So how do you break that mindset internally?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that example in, because many organizations actually have been making this misstep with hybrid work in particular. They've been scheduling their workers without regard to their schedule, without regard to, you know, what works well in terms of their work and their autonomy. For what I would say to a manager like that, I would encourage them to trust their employees. I think that's what it really comes down to, is trust your employees, trust them to get the work done. And I would recommend that they, you know, give clear instructions to their employees and then check the performance. Just stay on top of it. And that will help you build that trust and help your employees know and be clear on what they are supposed to do. So I'd say, like, do a little experiment. If you're worried, give your employees a task that they can do from home, give them a timeline, and then check in on it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a good idea. I like the little testing, you know, so let's test it this far, and then if that works, okay, let's go back again. And yeah, it's I mean, this is part of it, right? Like, it's, as you said before, we're just sort of making it up, trying to figure it out as we go, and there doesn't seem to be one size fits all approach for multiple companies or multiple industries.
Yeah, and individuals too. I would even be the first. I'm a huge advocate for remote work and hybrid work, but I would be one of the first to say not everyone is cut out for remote work. It's not for everyone. So I would definitely encourage people to think about it, you know, in terms of industry, company, and individual.
Yeah, no, definitely.
Yeah, I think I think as when you mentioned that bit about individuals promoting the things that they've done deliberately with their manager, I think some people would really struggle with that. And I'm an extrovert myself, but even I struggle with it sometimes. You know, nobody, with the exception maybe of Jamie, you know, just kidding. You know, people often don't like to toot their own horn, right? So I think to your point, Elora, I think some people are really, it's going to be hard work for some people to just remote work. You know, it's going to be a job in itself, remote working. So yeah, look, it's not that I have an answer to it, but I just wanted to acknowledge it. I think for some people it's going to be harder than others.
Absolutely. And I do want to give a quick tip for people who might struggle with kind of that, you know, talking about their achievements with their manager. And I want to say this particularly because it affects women in particular, where they just don't feel comfortable promoting and talking about their achievements. I say to think about it like talking about facts. Talk about the facts. Say, hey, I completed 3 of these accounts this morning. I caught X mistake and I corrected it. You know, talk about the facts. And I think when you stick to that, instead of saying like, hey, I'm so great, it's more like, this is what I've done. I think it's much easier to talk about your achievements. Divorce
yourself from it, you mean? Kind of like remove yourself from the task and talk about it. Third person, kind of, is that what you're saying?
I don't know if it's necessarily third person, but
not like, not someone else did it, but
I know a person like, who
or Elora this morning, she did a great job and now she's doing this podcast and not like third person like that, but I would say take the kind of value assessment out of it. Instead, just tell your manager the fact.
Factual.
Tell them like, hey, I got this many customers to kind of renew their contracts. That's a fact, and the manager can decide what the value is to them. But at that point, you've just delivered the facts.
I keep feeling like it's like we're building a span bridge. You know, you get a span bridge from either side of the river and it's got to meet in the middle. I think that, you know, it sounds like to me, or what I'm hearing is that managers need to play just as an important role and recognizing those people who aren't the self-promoters, you know, and I think that, yeah, it just, I mean, this comes back to where you were saying about the training and everything else, because it feels like there's going to be the people there who we say, hey, go and do it, but they're just not that, they haven't got that makeup, right?
Yeah, there might be some people who just aren't so cut out for remote work. It may be more difficult for them to kind of separate their home life and their work life and stay on task. That can certainly happen. Or they may feel that they need to have someone where they can reach out constantly, and that's not as doable when you're working remotely. A lot of times, and I did research into this, remote workers are only meeting with their manager on average once a week or twice a week, or sometimes like even as little as like once a month. So yeah, which I would say is not good management. I think once a week at least. But remote work does involve that autonomy and kind of self-direction, and not everyone may feel comfortable doing that.
Yeah.
Elora, there seems to be, in some of the employee engagement studies done, there seems to be a potential gender gap forming in relation to remote working or remote working environments. And I wondered whether you could speak to us about what this means for those who we may see more of in a return to office environment, and I guess who else would be affected by that Zoom ceiling.
I'm glad you asked this question, because I've actually researched different aspects of this.
Okay.
The first part I looked into was, you know, in the pandemic, many people were talking about how women are leaving the workforce more than men are. I didn't find any support for that in my own research. So I didn't find support that surprised me. But one thing that I did find is that women do prefer remote work a lot more frequently. And that's where the idea of the Zoom ceiling came from, actually, is I did the survey and I found, wow, like women are significantly more interested in remote work, and they want to keep that schedule compared to men who want to return to the office. I also found that there were some differences depending on if they had children or not. Men with children really wanted to return to the office. Women with children often said they wanted to work remotely. And I think it's more out of necessity to balance those responsibilities. And so I think there are going to be differences. And that's what kind of goes back to the Zoom ceiling, is a lot of women may choose to work remotely. They may like it as well, but also out of necessity to balance home responsibilities, children, elder care.
You know, it's interesting. I don't know if you found this, but sometimes I get the impression that particularly women might feel a bit guilty about having to, you know, take time off at 3:30 to look after or settle the kids when they've come from school or go pick them up. And, you know, I don't know, just wondering what your experience is and through your studies. Just, I mean, is this a conditioning from society that, you know, oh no, you can't be away from your desk at this time, and so therefore the overcompensation seems to happen?
Well, I can't tell you from personal experience. I don't have children, but I can tell you.
Karen nodding, don't worry. So I think I'm feeling okay about this question.
But I can tell you what I've heard from women and what I understand the experience to be. And this is actually what's really troubling, is you're hitting it. They feel guilty for having to leave and pick up the kids, you know, at 3:30, but it's a catch-22. They also feel guilty if they are not there for their family when they feel that they're supposed to be. Or sometimes people will externally say like, oh, don't you feel bad working all the time? I know that there's kind of pressure where it's almost like you can't win. And this is where I say, and I'm a huge advocate for this, I think equality in the workplace actually starts at home. I think that having partners who are supportive with raising children is one of the first steps to helping to advance women's career.
Yeah, it's almost foundational, right? Because it's setting the example in the fundamental scenarios, not just in the workplace as well.
Sorry,
Yes.
just one more point on that, which is interesting. So I've had, as you both know, I've had 8.5 months traveling around Australia and working on the road. And so, as I said to my kids, every day is a Monday, every day is a Saturday. So, you know, if we've got something great to go and do, we'll go and do it. But there's also work as well. So the interesting part for me personally was I sort of experienced the reverse guilt, you know, like the fact that I wasn't spending the time with the family, that I was sort of on the laptop, that I was, you know, doing the work. And that was a really, you know, it's a really good point you bring up, because there's that sort of seesaw. You're running from one end to the other. You're feeling guilty that you're not giving enough oxygen to work and you're not giving enough oxygen to family. And so, I mean, I suppose that the home, the differentiation between the home and the office, you know, it does, you know, you can turn off and you can go, okay, I'm in work mode, I'm in work, and people know that you're away and it's a thing. But when you're actually at home or remote working with the family there, I think it's a really difficult and interesting conversation, right? And I think that as soon as we can crack that and figure out how people don't feel guilty one way or the other, I think it's going to be a good day.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, and Jamie, you probably would have experienced this, it's the constant pivoting between subject matter, I guess, if I can call it. So you're either in work mode or you're in family mode or kid mode or whatever it is, that constant pivoting, and I'm talking like minute to minute pivoting sometimes, not just blocks of time. Yeah. That is what burns you out. And Elora, I think I read maybe in perhaps an article that you contributed to, you know, there was concerns around the return to office, and that pivoting between working from home and then working back in the office initially could potentially be something similar to that for individuals, where they potentially could burn out in the interim of getting that new hybrid working model for themselves, right? Because, you know, it's kind of like you get to the office, you're like, oh, did I bring my mouse? Did I bring my keyboard? Oh gosh, no, I left that at home. You know, is that come out through some of your studies as well, that, you know, managers and organizations need to be prepared for a potential peak in not exhaustion and burnout, but from their employees, give them time and latitude to get that model right for themselves when and if we ever return to the office?
Yes, yeah. So in my research, I found that employees reported high levels of burnout and emotional exhaustion when they worked in person as well as hybrid. And I think that one piece, especially with the hybrid, is that your employer's a lot of times dictating your schedule. And there is that kind of task switching. And so you're coming onto a really important topic, I think, which affects remote workers, is that multitasking, which really multitasking is just switching back and forth all the time. And you lose a lot of your kind of processing, you lose that motivation each time you have to turn your attention from, you know, your child or, you know, some kind of concern at home back to work and so on.
I know. I used to thrive. I used to thrive on being a multitasker, and now I kind of dread it.
Everything I read, it says it's not really a thing, right? Like the multitasking doesn't work. And I suppose to Karen's point, it's like you're on a Zoom and your kids are running around and you're politely asking them to be quiet. Maybe not so politely, but you sort of you click yourself on mute, you go across and do the thing, and then you're back in. So
I've actually. Oh, sorry, Jamie. You just broke up there for a second. Sorry.
Yeah.
Oh, good. It's funny because I actually recently heard about, I think, I'm not sure if it's an organization in the US, but anyway, it was a large multinational recently had brought in, I think it was a policy around the 3 to 3:30 mark. It was kind of like a tools down period so that it would remove the guilt for the parents. It was a widely acknowledged policy from this period to this period. You go pick up your kids and you actually take the time to listen how their day was. Like, you know, we always kind of, you know, slot in the question, how was your day? And they either answer or they don't. Sometimes that, you know, will be a bedtime, sometimes it'll be a dinner time, but they've actually purposely blocked out time for their employees to say, you know, pick them up, have that conversation right after school so that you can actually listen to the answer rather than just it being obligatory kind of tick the box, how was your day? Great, off you go back to work. So, which I thought was a really nice acknowledgement. And and similar to some of the policies that have been set up for organisations around where they block out time for concentration work and things like that. Just an extension of helping employees self-manage, I guess, their commitments outside of work, which I thought was nice.
Yeah, I think that's a great strategy. I haven't read about that one specifically, but I think it's great because it, like you said, relieves parents of that guilt, but also for, employees who aren't parents, it can give them kind of some freedom as well in terms of how they want to use their time. If they want to take a second, recharge for work and then get back to their tasks. I see no issues with that policy at all.
Exactly. It doesn't have to be exclusive to parents. Exactly.
I was about to say, it's not exclusive to parents. We've seen Ganda and the cat jump up a couple of times, and I'm sure you've got the same sort of feeling. You're like, God damn it, this cat's up again. And
yeah, it's true. It's true. He's behind me now.
Kids, but you still experience it, right? It's the same thing.
Exactly.
I'll be honest, this is kind of a side conversation, but back when I used to work in person before the pandemic, I would actually get jealousy. I would be getting ready to go to work early in the morning, like 6 a.m. It's cold outside. My 2 cats would be laying on my bed, just comfortable. And when I would get home, they'd usually be still there, like comfortable sleeping where I left them, even though it was like 10 hours later. I'm sure they got up and wandered, but I would feel jealousy actually for their luxurious life. I don't know if I think I would feel a little bit of guilt leaving them for long periods of time, but they're a little more independent than children.
Yeah, true.
All right, so this is my favorite question, and we try to slip this into every conversation we have. Crystal ball time.
Oh goodness.
I know. Shake it, see what happens. What's next for return to office, remote working, hybrid working? What's your crystal ball saying, Elora?
Okay, a crystal ball. No.
Head dressed like a gypsy.
Yeah, I would say the first thing I'll say is that remote and hybrid work are here to stay. We had a shift coming anyways, but the pandemic just increased the speed of that shift to remote and hybrid work. So those are here to stay. Some companies may choose to go back, but they may suffer some consequences. In my research, I've been trending data over time to look at how favorable workers are about coming back to the office. They're becoming progressively less favorable over time. They're getting comfortable working from home. So organizations that don't offer that remote work or make the switch too quickly could lose employees. I will also say that this shift with remote and hybrid work is going to increase something else that was happening, and that's globalization. We are becoming much more of a global network because we are all working remotely and hybrid, and it's much easier to go ahead and schedule a Zoom meeting with someone on the other side of the world. We're breaking down barriers. And I feel pretty optimistic, actually, just waiting for the pandemic to not be so severe.
It's interesting, I've been thinking through this discussion that, there's going to be some workers out there who this is all they've known. They might have started a role, like particularly the younger generation, right? They come along and they've started working, and then the pandemic's hit, and they might have actually had more time working remotely than actually working in the office. Yeah. So I just wonder if that's going to be, a mindset moving forward that this won't be an option for them. Like coming back into the office 5 days a week isn't going to be an option or something that they want to pursue.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. This experience especially is going to leave its impression on younger generations, just the way that like the Great Depression left an impression on people of that time. I think this shift will definitely color their values and their desire for remote work.
There you go, Jamie. You're going to have to come up with another policy.
I love it. So there's one final question I had, and I think that a lot of the stuff that we've discussed has been fantastic. A lot of your research has obviously been highly relevant. Where can people go to start to build their own manuals or start to to get their pieces of information? Because this is, as we've sort of discussed, it's an individual organisation project. It's not a one size But, you know, for mobility professionals or HR professionals out there, how do they start to build their own little handbook? Where do they go for this information?
Okay, you want like specific like
Yep,
societies and
sure.
sources?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I have a couple in mind right away. I think some of the go-tos for any kind of business question like this, SHRM, as well as Harvard Business Review would be another good one as well. I would also suggest looking into scholarly research. There's a lot of research kind of looking at remote work and how the pandemic has affected workers. That tends to lag a little bit behind the times because of the peer review process. But I think it could be good quality research as well. The other thing I would suggest is looking to people who have been working remotely long-term. So looking to people who do have a lot of experience in it. But it's certainly something we've been kind of bumbling our way through. And I would say that it requires flexibility, because what works for you in your current organization and with your remote work may not work in another organization. And I think that's one of the big takeaways.
Absolutely. One size fits all. Yeah.
What we could do, if you want to share some links to us, we could put it up on our website, and, you know, maybe that's just starting a little thing. I think that, you know, having conversations like this and being able to go to a place that you can start together, I think it's just going to only help people, right?
Yeah, I'd be happy to share some links. I think it's something that we want to be intentional about, and doing some of this research and having these links here will be really helpful.
Yeah, perfect. Good.
Beautiful. Thank you, Elora, so much for your time and for sharing those insights with us. It's been fascinating, and I'm sure everybody watching has madly taken notes, as Jamie and I have.
Yes.
And
that is nice thing. Yeah, Elora, I agree. It's been fantastic. I have taken a whole handful of notes and you know, just changing the way just not changing, but just, you know, putting my focus into how we're going to manage this moving forward as our business and our team goes. And, you know, where all the stuff you talked about, we're facing exactly those scenarios across the board, you know, from people who are extroverts to people who are introverts and who are not self-promoters, and how are we interacting and not dictating, but how are we getting people back into the office. I mean, there's no denying the face-to-face is great, but I think that this also has, you know, every area has its place, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And the other thing to add on is just that it's an ever-changing situation. Yeah. I think we'll come up with new technology and new ways of working remotely. And I think we will still be talking about remote work and hybrid work even a few years from now, and how to do it better.
Can't wait.
We'll get you back for that.
Exactly, the 12-month crystal ball.
Yes, thank you so much for having me on. I've enjoyed our conversation.
Yeah, we have to. Thanks for your time.
Thanks, Elora.
Thanks, Elora.
Bye.